Good morning, everyone. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Executive Review Session for the April 23rd, 2019 hearing. We will begin with the appeals calendar. Continued hearings, item number 1, 2017-310A, 1002 Farragut Road, Brooklyn, and it has a companion case, which is a new case, item number 2, 2019-45A, 1002 Farragut Road, Brooklyn.
Okay. With this one, the first case, the request to modify the C of O, we effectively adjourned last time to request that DOB go through the process of issuing a determination on whether or not the use is use group 16. So that the owner could appeal that if the decision was negative. Owner did appeal, and so the main subject today will be that discussion of whether the use is use group 16 or 18. So, and in terms of just the notice requirements for that, let's see, there are no notice requirements for applications for interpretive appeals, but we do have proof that DOB was served with the owner's initial application to challenge DOB's interpretation of the use and also of this hearing. So, as I said, the question before us is whether the use is properly use group 18, as DOB states in its ZRD1 of January 29th, 2019. I just want to note that use group 18 is not listed, does not list solid waste transfer station as use. The closest equivalent to which on use group 18 is radioactive waste disposal services, sewage disposal plants, dumps, marine transfer stations for garbage or slag piles. So DOB is actually relying on its technical policy and procedure notice 2 of 91 that determined that a, quote, solid waste transfer station, unquote, is use group 18 without defining that use any further. The DEC's website lists what they consider to be types of, quote, solid waste and, quote, regulated medical waste, which is what we're talking about here, is included in the list. Medical waste and waste management companies are listed among the regulated institutions involved in regulated medical waste. And what we're talking about in this case is a sort of a receiver and transporter of transfer of regulated medical waste. DEC's website states that most regulated medical waste is disposed of off of the site of generation and is, quote, required to be placed in plastic bags and then packaged in single-use or reusable rigid containers such as plastic or semi-rigid leak-proof containers before transport. It is then either, quote, transported to a designated secure storage or collection area within the facility for third-party pickup or to a generator's on-site treatment facility. If collected by third-party transporters, it is either, quote, transported to a permanent transfer facility or directly to an authorized treatment facility. I was trying to understand what this regulated medical waste is and what a transfer of it is. That's why I went to look at DEC's information. And I found that information, some of which I quoted above, particularly instructive, since hospitals, nursing homes, colleges, medical facilities, dentists' offices, and then I later learned even hotels are generators of regulated medical waste. And they prepare the regulated medical waste for transport to transfer facilities or move it to storage areas or treatment facilities that are on site. All of the uses I just listed, except for the hotels, well, including the hotels, depending on what district you're talking about, are permitted in residence districts. And notably, DOB's statement at page 11 in its April 9th submission that regulated medical waste transfer stations are not consistent with use group 16 uses, which are characterized as being required widely throughout the city, is very surprising. given the literally thousands of medical offices, dentist's office, veterinarian's office, and dozens of hospitals, there are 66 in New York, I looked it up, plus possibly hundreds of clinics in New York City, all of which, of course, produce and must dispose of their regulated medical waste, and some of which I know the large hospitals do it right there on site, right there in an R10 zoning district. And then I'd like to understand, is DOB's inclusion of regulated medical waste transfer facility the equivalent of a solid waste treatment facility that includes management of construction debris, recycling, discarded automobiles, et cetera? They're really large things. DEC's open data map, which actually, where you can look up transfer stations, actually doesn't include this site among its transfer stations, even though that we know the site is permitted. So without contacting DEC, which I think actually would be useful for one of us to do, our council or the project manager to do, to find out at what point a transfer station gets listed on its open data, because maybe this is considered too small of a site, maybe there are sites. I think there were only, yeah, there weren't very many on the sites. Did you want to throw in something? Okay. And so I'd like also to ask DOB how it responds to the fact that, as stated by owner, regulated medical waste is specifically excluded from the Department of Sanitation's list of solid waste transfer stations, which require permits in the New York City Administrative Code, Section 16-130. And so 16-120 allows the Department of Sanitation to inspect medical waste generation, storage, and disposal facilities. But it is clear by the text that such facilities are in the types of uses permitted in residence districts, as I said, hospitals, doctors' offices, et cetera. Section 16-120 is in contradiction, however, to owner's statement in its November 18 submission at page 7, which says that Department of Sanitation does not inspect such facilities. So I'd like the owner, you're making a query about that.
I'm a little confused because I read the last DOB statement and it seems like they've moved away from making the determination that it's a solid waste transfer station and are now saying regulated medical waste is a problem for the community because it's a danger to public health because of the different things that could comprise it, as well as it is a heavy-duty use because of the amount of truck traffic that it's generating. So that's why I was a little confused by the direction.
So it's not the direction. I'm reading all the materials and I'm responding to all of them because I don't know that DOB is then saying, okay, it's not a solid waste transfer anymore.
Oh, I thought they did because in answer to the appellant in the other appeal, that this is not regulated by Department of Sanitation, and so therefore it doesn't rise to the threshold of being included in the TPPN.
But so that's why I'm bringing this up. So it is regulated according to what I understand by the Department of Sanitation. That's what I wanted the owner to address.
Okay.
So DOS actually says it does inspect the facilities or has the right to. So I'd like the owner, and being no expert on this subject, maybe they inspect some of the facilities. Maybe they inspect the ones that are on their open data, and this one somehow or other doesn't rise to that. But I'm just reading the statute that says it has the right to inspect. So that's inconsistent. And I know that an earlier argument that the owner was making that's in their various papers where they're trying to get these recons, they said, wait a minute, your TPPN of 91 predates the time when Department of Sanitation was regulating these regulated medical waste transfer stations, right? So the TPPN can't have to do with us because the situation didn't exist, right? So what I'm trying to understand is, are they mixing up two arguments? Are they saying it didn't used to be regulated, but now it is, but since you're relying on the TPPN, what matters is it didn't used to be regulated, right? Okay. And then I'm just, it's sort of like when we look at all of these questions, So if DOB brings something up, I don't think it's all right for us to just ignore it. I think we need to take those also to a conclusion, even if DOB is like stepping away from that, because otherwise it won't be, I think, fully and fairly considered. And they could always bring that up again, which we've had in another case where we recommended to the owner.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing not to do
Yeah.
that. I just wanted to know the context of the discussion.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, understood, okay. So then, just to continue with respect to the TPPN, its characterization of solid waste transfer stations in use group 18 seems to be targeted at ensuring that such stations meet the performance standards of 4240, which is totally understandable, where large amounts of construction debris and large-scale waste will be delivered and managed at a site. That's a dusty, noisy, vibrating, odorous, gaseous type of work. The work is similar to many of the listed use group 18 uses, but that does not appear to be the case in the subject situation where everything is in small containers. We've all been to medical offices. We all know what those little red containers look like. You see them standing around in the offices. You see them sitting by the door for pickup. You see all that kind of thing. Yeah.
To that, I would say there's differences between certain medical waste and other medical waste, regulated medical waste. A lot of regulated medical waste, especially in hospitals, tend to be radioactive. There are medicines that are given that are radioactive to people, that waste becomes radioactive. So I think there's different degrees of regulated medical waste.
Yeah.
I didn't get anything about what type of medical waste are we speaking about here? Is it a dentist office medical waste, or is it?
No, they actually did talk about it. They said they have a specific permit. The permit actually lists what they're allowed to have, and radioactive is not one of them. They say if they have something that they receive by accident, they send it back.
Right,
because
they
they're not
have a
allowed.
radioactive scanner
Right.
to make sure that none of the waste has radioactive particles in it.
Right, so, yeah, so, and the other thing was that, you know, there was that, the neighbors have been trying to stop this for a long time, right? So they appealed the issuance of the permit. And when the administrative law judge ruled on it, or actually it went up to the next level, whatever that person is, they in that decision, they described it as waste, the waste that would be accepted would include fixer and developer waste, formalin, formaldehyde, and formaldehyde solutions, xylene, alcohol, mercury, and waste mercury. So when the administrative law judge said that, I didn't understand whether that was the exhaustive list, like that's what they handle, or whether that's just one of the things that one of the groups of things they handle, and they also handle kind of pathogens, blood products, that kind of thing. That confused me because the judge was so specific about formaldehyde, which, by the way, is in your wood products, so that you sit on. So, I'm sorry to report. And xylene, I think we also see often when you look at the ingredients of things we use. In terms of the scope of use, though, I would like the owner to explain how it is restricted to the area within the dashed lines that are shown on the first floor plan. They also show it hatching on another plan on A101-01. Since that area is not defined by demising walls, it sort of bleeds into another area. It's quite confusing to understand that. And also explain for them to explain footnote 5 on page 3 of the March 18th submission that states that the balance of the building is an ambulette company, which I see it is because you see the ambulettes parked out front. But elsewhere in the same materials and in others, and on the CO, it states that the building is used for auto repairs. So now I'm confused. Maybe ambulette fits within use group 16 or whatever it is, but that brought up a new use that is sort of in the building and may be replacing the auto repair shop. I also need more on understanding what a use group 16 motor freight station is, which is what the owner is arguing they are. Besides the UPS facility, they should provide examples of other motor freight stations and their certificates of occupancy. DOB should also discuss the discrepancy in treatment between the subject site and the regulated medical waste facility at 10401 Foster Avenue, which is cited in owner's letter that was accompanying the ZRD1 of January 29th at page 6. Also, when I did a quick check on a few of the other RMW facilities that are shown on Biomedical Waste Solutions website, they show the use not listed on the Cs of Os, so I really couldn't find more than one that had a use listed, and located in M1 districts where use group 18 is not permitted. So there were many of these stations listed, though none of them show up on the Cs of O. And one company I found online does, as owner state, use the U.S. Postal Service for RMW generators to ship their waste for disposal. It's called medicalwasteby.mail.com. So I'm not sure, I didn't look up like, what are you allowed to ship and so on. It's more than sharps, apparently. Because sharps, apparently, people have in their houses. And so everyone potentially is a creator of regulated medical waste. I do take note of one C of O that DOB could produce showing treatment on Staten Island of a site as use group 18. It isn't clear from their website, however, whether they are merely a transfer facility or also a treatment facility. I'd like more information on this. On their website, it says, we specialize in proper pickup, treatment, and biohazard waste disposal, such as red bag, medical waste, and sharps containers. So when they say disposal, it could be that they're actually handling the materials, which is a completely different thing. And that would indeed rise to a level of use group 18, it seems to me.
Did DOB respond to the appellant statement that parcel UPS also transfers medical waste? And if they didn't respond, because I didn't see the response, they should distinguish between this place and UPS.
They did, however, their comment was that the volume of such material being transferred or carried by UPS or such is so little that
How do they know? How would they know that? How do
If
they
anything, it
determine
would be
that?
the opposite.
Right, because UPS is
Super
so-
easy.
So, they have such a volume of
Right.
things that they transfer. How would they be able to track it?
Right, and if you talk about this medicalwaste.com, right, by mail, they're using UPS, right? So if that's a cheap, doctors work on what's cheapest, right? So their staff is looking up, how much does this guy charge versus this guy? And if it's much cheaper to do it by mail, whatever's allowed to be sent by mail will be sent by mail. I mean, you can go to the post office, UPS picks up, things like that, right? So, and I'm also confused by DOB's concern about the residence. They keep talking about the residence that's located 2 blocks away from the subject site, and the concern that 35 truck trips or the passing of a truck containing RMW puts this house at special risk. The first thing is, these trucks are passing throughout neighborhoods. That's how they get there. That's how all of our very scary stuff drives through the city, passes right by your house, unless you live on a sleepy, dead-end street, right?
especially now that we know
Well, yeah.
you can transport these via UPS.
Well,
Yes.
I don't know if they, but with regard to the UPS, I'm not sure if they were saying that the UPS that is next to the
No,
this
I'm not
site, or
talking
saying
about
all
that.
UPSs.
All
don't.
UPSs.
That's how you read that statement.
So it's not, all UPSs, because it's clear that it can be mailed,
Right.
right? Or sent by common carrier, so there's probably a FedEx program, people do it by FedEx because they're sending samples that go to testing labs often go by things like FedEx, for
Right.
example. In fact, the patient can send your samples by FedEx.
Right.
So often, that's how they tell you what to do, right?
Right.
But then the other thing that I just wanted to finish was that the house is located, like its immediate neighbors, across the street from an enormous restaurant supply store, enormous place. And if you look at its facing frontage that faces this site, there are, 24 semi-trailers coming in and out all day long. This is an enormous, it's like restaurant central for the entire city, right? So to be worried about 35 little trucks versus these enormous semi-trailers, that seems disingenuous to me. And then I think that's my comment, so go ahead.
So, I think way I looked at DOB's issues was, DOB was focusing on what is the use group 16 criteria, and they focused on the two criteria that use group 16 lists. And one of that has to do with the number one, which is the use that is either involved considerable danger of fire, explosion, or other hazards.
This is 16.
18.
That's 18.
Sorry,
That's
that's 18,
18.
sorry.
Yeah.
And then the other one is the great deal of freight traffic. Now, the difference, what I thought was the freight traffic argument, that's the easy, I just thought that did not, didn't apply. Because when you look at the kind of uses that are permitted under use group 16D, the trucking terminal or motor freight station uses, as are indicated in 16D, I mean, the nature of these uses is trucking and freight like FedEx and UPSs, and they generate great deal of freight traffic. And so the critical difference is the transportation of hazardous material versus goods, right? And so I did not think that criteria two applied.
Sorry.
Considerable risk
Criteria.
of fire?
Yeah, I'm actually trying to look
Yeah.
at the, yeah, it's the use group 18-2 normally generates a great deal of traffic and both freight, and I didn't think that applied.
Right, but
to-
then
to
go
this.
back to the critical difference is transport of hazardous materials versus goods.
So when
Then-
takes me to item number criteria 1, use group 18's criteria, which says either involves considerable danger of fire, explosion, or other hazard material to public safety. And that's when I started trying to understand what is really happening at this location, as opposed to using a very broad brush, solid waste kind of usage application, and therefore kind of saying this therefore qualifies under solid waste. And I was thinking in the same way as the chair explained, is that you have so many medical facilities tucked away in the residential areas where there's a huge amount of medical waste that is being created. And if those are permitted and those are being transported, but those are being transported in a manner that is required to be transported, all this is just transferring that packaged sealed container from one medical facility. They're not processing the waste here. They're not packaging the waste on the side. All they're doing is they're taking a packaged, sealed waste from one facility, bringing it there and taking it to the disposal area. That's how I understand the operation to be. So I do see it not being a use group, not meeting the criteria 1 of 18. It is more, it falls more in the 16 criteria. Where in the 16 A, B, C, D, that's a different matter, but it definitely doesn't fall in the 18 category. That's was my take on it. And I agree with the chair's clear breakdown of the.
So when I looked at the DOB papers, it seemed to me that the way in which they were describing what goes on with regulated medical waste made you feel like it was a free-for-all, and that literally hospitals and doctors were just dumping stuff in hefty bags and tossing it into the back of a truck, because the way they say, like, could be Ebola that's being transferred, all sorts of things, makes you not think about the fact that there are standards for packaging and disposal that doctors and hospitals have to abide by. And so they have to make this waste safe when they first discharge the waste from their own environment. And so I believe that's what's coming to this regulated medical waste transfer station is an actual discrete package, I don't know what size it is, but sealed, hermetically sealed in a way that is dictated by the medical community. And so I'm not quite as alarmed as I think DOB wants me to be. And so I would want to know a little bit more about perhaps the regulations that are in place that are kind of regulating how this stuff is packaged at the source before it comes out. because as far as I see it, it seems that if you're just taking sealed packages and removing it from a truck and putting it on another truck, there's no problem here. And the fact that UPS does the same thing and has not fallen into the crosshairs of DOB, I'm not sure what the issue is.
I agree with what was said so far, but I believe it would be beneficial for us to ask for some sort of an operational plan for the facility, just to make sure that the process taking place on that facility is not treatment slash, like some sort of,
Disposal.
yes, disposal. It's just a transfer. So like Commissioner Brown said, it's they get the package, they pick it from a truck, they put it on another truck, and that's it. It's not getting opened, it's not getting sorted.
Well, I think-
I believe it would be beneficial to ask for something in writing from the applicant.
But
While
they
they say-
did say that, the appellant did say that's all they did. They went into detail that it's literally, they take it off of smaller trucks and throw it onto larger trucks to a different
So
destination, and
what-
they never open it.
Wait,
What does
let her
sorting
finish.
mean, though? So how would you define sorting? They mentioned.
How would you define sorry?
Sorting, the
Sorting.
sorting.
Taking-
They mentioned that they do then bring it in the building, they weigh it, and so I'm not sure what the purpose of weighing it is. Do some go one way, do others go a different way? It's not going from truck to truck, they're actually going into the facility. So I would assume if you're weighing it, I guess that, for me, would fall into sorting of some sort, not to use the same
But
word
it's
twice.
sealed in hard side containers. It's not, they're
You're not
not
sorting the
opening
waste in it, it's of
Right,
itself.
yeah, it's
No,
sealed.
yeah, because it seems like at a certain point, you know, if the hospital throws all the same stuff, more or less, into the same container, at its final destination, certain things need to be dealt with differently than other things, right? So
Maybe they
someone
go to
is
different
opening
places.
that box, and they're sorting, I don't want to even think about what they're actually sorting, what into what, but they're sorting what into what. But so that's when it's down into like really dirty stuff in a controlled environment that would need to be in a particular place. I don't even know where these actual disposal facilities are.
But I don't think they do. I think the hospital does that.
Yeah,
Because if
maybe.
you go into a hospital,
You have
they
to
don't
think-
throw sheets and needles into a bag and send it down
No.
to the basement. Needles go into those
Yes.
red boxes, and soiled sheets go into here, and soiled paper products
Right.
go into there. So I think the sorting is done at the source.
It could be, but there may be further sorting, but that's because we don't know.
I think it's, the way I read it is that the whole sorting is happening more for them to, for record keeping of the amount of waste that they're transferring to certain facilities
Yes.
of certain kind and keeping track of it. And that may be
Right.
part of the regulatory requirements, that could be part of their billing processes, it could be so many things. I didn't see the sorting as more like going through it.
Right.
No,
No.
yeah, yeah.
I
Carl.
think, I think to Dr. Sheeta's point, I think they should just maybe explain the way they're breaking it down, because it sounds like perhaps by weight, it's the way they send it to a particular facility on a type of, whether it's sharp or it's a blood product. So maybe they can give us an explanation as to what's
Clarify
occurring
that.
on this facility and what those requirements are to the receiving facilities where they send it in a larger bulk.
Right.
And make this some sort of an operational plan, so it's clear what they are doing exactly on site, and to make sure nothing wrong is gonna just accidentally take place.
Right.
Because I don't think when they say sorting, it may not be that it's the sorting is it's
Yeah.
the way they pick up from the small vehicles and probably have to weigh it, and they probably pay by weight.
Weight or number of
tonnage,
boxes or
It's like an
something.
economy of scale probably.
Yeah, right, because it's going into different sized trucks, et cetera, right?
In different locations.
And they say there are 2 semi-trailers or something like that that arrive each day, so it's probably, they need, for bills of lading, I mean, what I thought was interesting is DOB's argument that they weren't goods. This is very big business, so what's a good, right? The transfer of, even these days, metal is a good, right? Recycled materials are something of enormous value once they have been sorted and so on. So I'm not even sure anymore that we distinguish between what is a thing of value, because we've made almost everything a thing of value. But But I do think, though, that there are bills of lading. Every truck driver has to be able to show when they're stopped at the weighing stations and so on, what it is they're carrying, how much it weighs, how many of, et cetera. So it may just be because it's traveling across the country or wherever these things go.
And they may have requirements.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And it's also to prove to the creators of the medical waste
That it has been
that it's been properly disposed of, because I'm sure they're also investigated regularly, that they're not just throwing it in the trash.
Right.
Right? So, okay. Anything else?
And just to add to Commissioner Shetter's, I think the operational plan will be more for us to understand
Yeah.
what's happening. It's not something that we are going to regulate or require or anything, should anything go
Yes.
through.
I think in terms of this, because there are so many of these operations throughout the city, that should we decide one way or the other, that sort of a guidance for those other operations, whether or not they fit within the criteria. So this operational plan would say, essentially, for those that do the following things, you fit within this criteria. If you don't do those things, we don't know what you are, because we're not deciding that here. Right? Okay.
I'd like to hear a bit more on why there's a discrepancy between the department and the owner as to how many trips are being made. What's the basis of the discrepancy?
That's clear. There's a permit from DEC to allow 35 vans to, or whatever they are, to come and go on the site. That's per day. It's maxed out at that. The owner says, we have a permit for 35, but we only actually have 17. So that, the discrepancy is, they're allowed to have more, but they're not doing more.
Is that's the entire basis of why because
No, DOB is
wants us
basing it
to
on a
regulate it
permit.
back to 17, and they're just basing it on a
No,
permit?
no. DOB is looking at the permit, and the permit allows 35, so that means conceivably you could have 35, and so they're basing on basically the worst-case scenario, right? And the owner says, okay, we have a permit for 35, but really we have 17, but if you want us to look at 35 is not a great number, is what the owner says.
And that goes
I
back to
agree.
what the chair said. I mean, this, even if they were to operate at the maximum capacity that DEC has permitted of 35, this area, it's, freight trucks are everywhere. And here we are talking about smaller trucks that are going through this. And and this corner of this block, it's one side is blocked by the train station and the other side is
It's dead-end street.
Dead-end street, and you have all the freight services. So the truck traffics are itself creating quite a bit of the transportation issues. I don't think the freight adding 35 total, even its max, it's going to, it's
But it's not
rising
gonna
to
make much
that
of a difference.
level of criteria too, of use group 18.
And if you look
That's how I
at
see it.
UPS, again, the UPS facility that's on the west side here,
They have
way more
way
than
more trucks.
35
Oh,
trucks
yeah.
go through
Right.
there. If you just go by in the morning at
Right.
7:30, 35 trucks are leaving.
More than,
And
exactly.
that's just in 1 hour.
Right.
So I'm
And
not
if
sure.
if that can qualify as use group 16, D, which is use group, that's what UPS and FedEx would be, this is just 35.
No, I understand. And while I'm not convinced by the argument that freight
Freight?
could only be related to goods, and I don't see why that, while I can read a definition, I don't believe that that is a paramount point in that definition. I can understand the
Goods
community.
versus not goods.
Goods versus
Yeah.
not goods. I can understand the community's concerns because these aren't like the food industry that's next door to it. This is a very different type of transport. And if we're supposed to give it some more, if I'm supposed to see this as a more hazardous use, I think I need a little bit more information as to why it's dangerous.
From DOB.
From DOB. Well, I understand that, it may look dangerous because there are people wearing gloves as pursuant to ECL. I'd like to see, if they're a real concern as opposed to a hysteria of a possible concern. And that's something that I think is also important because you're in the middle of, while there is a residence up the block, and I understand it is technically 2 blocks, I can see, being at the site, I can see
No,
why.
it's not 2 blocks, it's 2 lots away
Oh, 2
from
lots.
the house, the first house in the neighborhood.
And they're also like you stated earlier, a restaurant chain, there's a big food servicing place next door. So if there's a real concern, I'd like to hear it, if there's something concrete as opposed to.
So, and I just want to point out the comment about gloves, I found kind of funny, because every sanitation department worker wears gloves when they take your household trash. And happily they do, and I wish they wore more protective covering, because they should wear masks.
I understand that.
What I also found interesting is that, like, certain waste, like animal waste, is not counted as RMW.
No,
Right.
no. Veterinary waste medical waste coming from animals in a veterinary hospital is
it's-
regulated.
But not as use group 18. I think
Oh, I see.
That's what the owner was stating. So, which I
I don't understand that exactly.
yeah, which I found,
Is,
unless I misread it.
I thought that veterinary hospitals also, I mean, certainly they do, because it's the same kind of things that are produced.
I remember reading that, I thought that it was within.
Yeah, it says zoning resolution 3525 permits the operation of an animal hospital, human and animal crematorium, and rabbit and poultry cleaning facilities, all
that's-
of which involve items such as culture, synergies, infectious.
This is in
agents,
16.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
right,
it's-
so that was part of the point. In 16, you can have
Right.
generators of the medical waste also located there, right? And a crematorium, actually, if you think about it, that is disposing of medical waste, right there in use group 16. I mean.
They also
in fact-
require. and
No,
they-
I'm looking at Carlos' face, because he doesn't
No, no.
understand the question, but
No,
it's
no,
like,
I'm sorry, no, I'm just, because Vice Chair Chanda is saying this Article 3 section is prohibiting, but the use group 16 is not permitted in the commercial district.
no, use
In
group
16
16 in
the
C8 is permitted, right?
It is
That's why
permitted.
we're going to use group
Got it,
16.
Right.
But the point is that if you can have, well, an animal hospital isn't different really than a regular hospital in terms of what it produces, right? It's just noisier, maybe that's why they put it in the 16 category, arguably noisier. But a crematorium is actually dealing with body parts, and it's disposing of the body parts. And we read somewhere that disposal of medical waste is often done by incineration, not different than a crematorium. So it's just a crematorium is kind of a more official, like a funeral-related thing, I guess.
And according to the owner's documentation, the animal hospital and dry cleaners are also subject to the state DEC permitting requirements similar to what they have received. So that was the other connection the owner was making
Yes.
as to why use group 16 was appropriate.
The only other thing I'd like to say is that the fact that solid waste, that regulated medical waste is excluded from the definition of solid waste, I don't think necessarily makes that a safer type of waste, because the other items that are excluded from solid waste need to be handled with, some of these items need to be handled with greater care. So while I appreciate that it's not a solid waste pursuant to that, I don't believe that necessarily means that it doesn't need to be the same level of care.
Right, and I don't think that that's real, I mean, I think if you look up what is a solid waste transfer station in the DEC website, you're talking about construction debris, you're talking about enormous things, where do I get rid of my car in a use group 18 area, where do I get rid of all the studs and everything like that?
And even the remedial waste.
Well, I'm saying, I'm
Right,
speaking more of
it's
like,
not right.
like, for example, radioactive waste is not considered, is also specifically excluded from the definition of solid waste. So that doesn't necessarily mean
yeah.
that needs to be, that it is, that the standard of care for or where it should be, isn't necessarily decided by it not being a definition of solid waste.
Yeah, understood, okay. Thank you. Okay.
That's all for this. We will continue with the special order calendar. Continued hearings. Item number 3, 218-58BZ, 77-40 Hewlett Street, Queens.
Okay. changes were made to the plans as requested. My only real comment was that the maneuverability diagram doesn't show the width of the cars. So the lines make it look like it's getting over the curb easily, but if you look at the width of the cars, it looks like the cars have to drive on the sidewalk in order to exit the site. So I think that should be showing the car widths. And I was looking at that in the context of, on the maneuverability diagram, but not on the site plan, they show some planters right on the property line edge with the interest of trying to deal with the parking on the sidewalk, right? Whether planters work or not, I don't really know. That's kind of like a scientific experiment. But I was looking and they only put planters at one little spot. Meanwhile, there's lots of other places to park on the sidewalk and lots of space between the curb cuts. But then, and so I thought, well, why can't you put planters in those other places between the curb cuts? But when you look at the dashed lines and the width of the car, you realize that the cars are going to drive right into the planters. And so it seems like there's a problem with the curb cut relationship to the pumps, at least the inside of the pump.
Well, I actually did not have a concern with the location of the planters that's been closed all the way closer to the 77th Road because there is a fire hydrant in between the two existing curb cuts that itself becomes an impediment for anybody wanting to park on the sidewalk, and therefore, so I think having the deterrence between the two extreme right-hand side curb cuts makes, and that's where most of the vehicles tend to
Right.
park on the sides. So I didn't think the parking on the curb cut was more of an issue on the fire hydrant. It was
Okay.
between the first two curbs on the right-hand side.
Okay, so other than that, I didn't have any other comments, except that this is a legalization, so I think the work they're proposing should be done now.
They have been very responsive to every comment, and I really appreciate them taking notes of the comments that they've gotten from the neighbors and from us and working with us, so I thank them.
Anybody else on this one?
Just the FEMA map, I did ask them to put the site on the FEMA map. Apparently, their thinking is because they don't have the specific map panel,
Yeah,
they don't have like the actual flood map to put the site on.
correct.
But this is not why we ask for showing the site location on the map. If they can show even the site location on the big map, like the more general map.
The one that's
Yeah.
all the panels.
The panels,
that show-
exactly. Just
Okay.
to make sure that this, your site is located within this panel that doesn't exist.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, okay. But the point is, when you have to show that whole FEMA panel, the collection of panels, it means you're so not in a floodplain that they don't even bother to make a map for you.
yeah, I
So,
understand,
right,
yes.
yeah, okay.
Yes. But who said that the site is existent within this not found
Yes.
panel?
If you can't
list?
find it.
Yeah.
Right, understood.
So
Okay.
just tell me that it's there, and then I understood. I know that you couldn't get the specific FEMA map for that panel.
Okay. Anybody else?
Item number 4, 159-00BZ, 383 3rd Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. At the last hearing, I asked about the room that is sealed off in the cellar and made completely inaccessible by the refrigerated trash storage. It's still there on the drawings. This can't be a legal condition. You can't seal off a room, but I actually don't want to belabor this anymore because for some reason or other, the architect just doesn't seem to be able to make these respond to these issues. So I want to say that this is for the Department of Buildings and the Fire Department to review. I'd suggest that actually we contact DOB, so this is a Chase or a Ted question, to inspect the site for code compliance, because the fact that you draw a room that you cannot get into gives me concern about the safety of this site. And that they look at it for code compliance, and whatever changes need to be made to the site and the plans be made under DOB's and fire department's watch. And so I'm not going to teach the architect architecture. The revised plans were provided with bubbles to show changes, but there was no cover letter provided to describe what these were. The drawings don't look any different from the ones provided in January. I actually have no idea why they were submitted. We do have conditional fire department sign-off, which is making reference to a number of violations. And they request that the board instruct the applicant to rectify the violations to make the school safe. And so fire department and now DOB will be in on this together. So I think we've done as much as we can do on this site. Now it's your problem.
Are we going to vote on it with that room?
Yeah,
being
so
closed?
there's an extension, what we talked about is an extension of 5 years to obtain a CO, and then the board will review a longer term based on fire department recommendations. That was a comment we had a long time ago because the school has been extremely bumpy in its ability to comply with code or safety or almost really anything. So it should be a short leash. And we will, I hope, Chase made a note to contact DOB to do an inspection. Okay, and fire department is sitting here watching us say that. And they've already inspected it, so they're on the case. Okay.
Item number 5, 132-04BZ, 310 Houston Street, Manhattan.
East Houston, right?
Oh, East Houston. East Houston, yeah.
They requested an adjournment. They're trying to get a ZRD1 about the existing floor area.
Item number 6, 122-07BZ, 1630 East 15th Street, Brooklyn.
Yeah, they did. They submitted a site plan, and that the only thing they were supposed to do was change the district boundary line, which they did. So the bound, to show that the entire building is in the C district, so they did that.
So I missed.
Yeah, I don't know when it was submitted, but they did do it. And I just want to point out again that the hours of operation, legalization was requested, which you might have notes on, but should I give them to you? Monday
through Thursday, 5:30 a.m. to 11 p.m., 5:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. on Friday, 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. on Saturday, and 7:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Sunday.
Correct.
And we received FDNY, yes.
Yes,
Last
we
time we
did.
did.
Yeah.
Great.
Item number 7, 231-14BZ, 124 West 23rd Street, Manhattan.
Sound mitigation flooring was installed under treadmills and tested March 21. This morning, we received a letter from the upstairs neighbor in 4 who said that the testing situation was kind of unfortunate, competing against lots of other noise sources. So this testing was done on March 21st. I don't know if there's been enough time for the neighbor to interpret whether the use has been, the use and the mitigation are working, and now you shouldn't need testing if you're not disturbed. So I didn't see that in the letter, whether or not he's okay. I didn't have a chance to read the whole letter.
He wants a 2-year term, so
A 2-year,
that
oh, he
this
wants a
could be
short leash.
monitored.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually thought it was interesting, the ambient noise factors that were cited included a small child playing in the abutting unit. So,
Right, but
In
there was
addition to
construction. There was
Yeah.
construction next door as well.
right.
Yeah.
And then he had concerns about the degrading of the rubber padding over time.
Sure.
And wanted to ensure that, should that happen, they would comply by replacing everything.
Yes, okay. And then I just wanted to note that the Sarami Report was written as if it's written in preparation for a lawsuit, frankly, because it's talking about that the tests reveal that for the most part, the sound levels are complying with the terms of the lease, which is not our concern. We're talking about complying with the terms of not annoying the neighbors. And it makes a note that the bedroom on the second floor had noise levels exceeding the lease criteria. So, and, you know, and because there was other competing noises, didn't come up as, because ambient noise levels were high, therefore, it didn't come up as a problem, but because there's construction going on, et cetera, that would mean there are high ambient noise levels, and the test might have been done later, or earlier in the morning before the construction workers get there, but they get there very early, but still. So, all right. So.
Right. The problem with that is, will it be before, they can get there very early, but there might not be a class.
No, but there are often these classes at 5:30 in the morning, and construction workers start maybe at 6, so that's part of the problem, right?
New cases, item number 8, 222-90BZ 80-02 Kew Gardens Road, Queens.
This was postponed, I think, for failure to give notice because I couldn't find notice. I don't actually know the reason why it was postponed.
Item number 9, 246-01BZ 35-11 Prince Street, Queens.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application and a notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends approval. We have Fire Department letter of no objection, and the site appears to comply with the conditions of the prior approval.
I just have one comment based on the photos that's been provided and what I saw on Google Map. The site needs to be maintained free of graffiti,
Free of graffiti.
especially along the, not the Prince Street, 35th Avenue.
But is that the property owner's responsibility or the PCE owner's responsibility?
That's a good
the
question. That's a good question, okay.
But it's a one-story commercial building with mostly a PCE, I think, if not entirely a PCE.
I don't know, they should clarify who's
Yeah.
responsible.
Right.
Well, let me just, I think there was somewhere in the resolution,
The
there were no-
resolution says
There's no
the
condition.
posting of the sign, change of ownership, parking for cars with a sign that identifies here, park here, and fire protection, no graffiti issue.
right, no graffiti was mentioned in the prior resolution.
But it's true that there is at least one other tenant in the building, so they're not the sole
So-
tenants, which would have made it like a net lease or something.
Was compliance demonstrated with regards to the parking at the premises? So there was a condition in 2002 that accessory parking in the cellar shall be provided and maintained for 16 cars,
Well, that,
with clearly visible signs to be posted identifying spaces designated for PCE members only. And there's a note that the parking layout shows more than 16 spaces, and that the signage at the site doesn't indicate that it's solely for members.
you mean the identifying the spaces for the PCE members only at the spaces, as opposed to, because I read it as that entrance sign
Oh,
that
then
says
that was
Bodie
done.
was,
Great.
please park here.
Great.
But not that there was a sign on every space.
Okay,
Right.
Maybe that depends on how people think about it. but
okay.
Yeah,
But that was everyone else's understanding, there's
That-
no
I don't-
problems with the parking?
yeah. It was, the sign is certainly
It's because
clearly
it says that a
visible.
sign shall be posted within the PC stating, that accessory parking in the cellar shall be provided and maintained. And
Well, to Ms. Monroe's point, council's
Yeah.
point, it says that shall be provided for 16 cars with an entrance from 35th Avenue with clearly visible signs to be posted identifying spaces designated for PCE. So it sounds like the way it was interpreted is just to put up a big sign that says park here, as opposed to you drive in and
There's a
put up
sign.
a bunch of little signs. I don't know. I don't have an opinion.
They need to correct their statement of facts with regard to the hours. I believe there's a mistake between 12 a.m. and 12 p.m.
Oh,
Okay.
you need to get a little lesson on how you designate the.
Oh, they got it right the
PMs and
next time. On
AM.
the very next one, it's correct at the very next one.
Oh, okay.
So,
Moving on,
Uh-huh.
item number 10.
Sorry, I just want to state that I was looking at the previously approved plan. In the previously approved plan, it shows areas designated for gym parking area and the billiard parking area. So we just then should make sure whatever plan we are going to approve, going with it also has similar.
Should have similar kind of demarcations of parking spaces?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And
Is
it under
which it
residence?
does.
Okay.
It does. Billiard parking area, and I'm just looking at it, I didn't look at it before with
Sure.
that in mind, but it does seem to indicate the similar
There's a
location.
residential
Okay.
on the other side.
Billiard parking,
Yeah, where they're
NPC
extending.
parking, yeah.
I suppose we could just ask them, do you have a sign up that says
That is-
PC parking?
yes, you
Makes
can
it
ask them.
easier.
Yes, that would be, let's just ask them.
And if they could just, perhaps just bring a photo in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't see when I was.
okay. Great.
Doesn't have to be a fan, just from a phone.
Yeah, but I don't know if the applicant's rep is here yet. Okay.
It is an
Okay.
eating. and
Yeah, that's an
drinking
easy
facility there.
email, quick,
Yeah, just an email of the photo.
yeah.
I hope that could be your home.
Item number 10, 208-03BZ, 2555 Shell Road, Brooklyn.
Okay, so they added, at the 0 hour, they added, on Friday at 9 AM to the application, an extension of time to obtain the CO. So because I don't know whether commissioners on a holiday weekend could have possibly known about the change, I'd like the applicant to discuss any other changes made to the application, because in fact, the drawings had notes added and things like that, which is further than just simply changing the scope of the application, okay? I wish that people wouldn't do that. Okay, so we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials, and the community board recommends approval. They should provide a copy of the current off-site parking lease.
They did.
They did?
That was today.
Oh.
That was submitted last week, which is the affidavit.
No, that's an affidavit, it's
Oh, sorry.
different. I mean a lease.
A lease.
A lease
I'm
is
sorry.
a contractual
sorry.
document.
I'm sorry.
Right?
Sorry.
Which we learn about in property law 101. And provide a lease and a letter from the owner of the site that the site is not for sale and is available for use as off-site parking for this use, which was what was asked for at the last hearing, or the last resolution, it's stated in the resolution. And if the two sites are held in common ownership, which they may be, getting the impression they are, they should provide copies of the deeds establishing this, in which case you don't really have, unless it's held by two separate LLCs, there wouldn't be a lease because it's kind of merging interest, right? And provide copies of the PA permits that are referred to. And then I just want to make a note that the conditions of the prior grant, as with all of our applications, should be carried over. But in this case, there's valet parking and a provision of 80 spaces off-site in an off-site parking lot at 25-69 Shell Road. So that will continue, and that's where we need the verification that that's where the off-site parking is and that it's valet. Okay.
Item number 11, 183-09BZ, 1400 Fifth Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Since this is a PCE at the base of a residential building and the use involves treadmills, bikes, and weights, the neighbors should be notified for the next hearing. So everybody in the building with a posting, and now I want to reiterate, the posting has to indicate clearly the hearing date and has to state that people can attend in person or submit their comments to submit. And it needs to be very clearly posted, and the photograph of the posting has to indicate where in the lobby it is located, so it's clear to us that it's not a photograph taken on the wall of your office, or of the wall of your office. We also don't have the community board recommendation. Fire department issued a letter of objection and asked that we hold off on our decision until a fire alarm system application has been filed. They need to provide photographic evidence of compliance with the board's conditions at the original grant. I also don't understand how handicapped access works to access activities in the cellar. I'd like them to explain that. And they're also requesting a change in hours of operation. It says the current weekday hours of operation are unchanged, so that
the
means...
weekend.
Yeah, so I'll just read it. Monday through Thursday, 5:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. Friday, 5:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then they want Saturday, so current weekend hours are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It used to be 6 p.m. So basically, that's what they're changing.
So the
So
difference-
7 a to 7 p on Saturday
And Sunday.
and Sunday.
Okay.
So Saturday was 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and Sunday was 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And the proposal is to have a weekend of 7 to 7.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay.
Appeals calendar, continued hearings, item number 12, 238-15A through 243-15A, 102-04, 08, 12, 16, 20, 24, Dunton Court, Queens.
As you know, this has been going on for a very long time. And the principal reason for it is the struggle both to get it into code compliance because it had zoning problems, and then to persuade the applicant to provide us with an HOA and a restrictive deck. So we did get the restrictive deck at long last, which our council has signed off on. That needs to be executed and recorded prior to issuance of the resolution. But then I had this haunting feeling we were waiting for an HOA. And so I listened to the video of the last hearing and am astounded that the applicant's two representatives simply ignored what we agreed on at the last hearing. We said it over and over again. We had asked for the HOA to be corrected to respond to council's comments, and it was agreed that one would be submitted or an explanation of why, if so, none was feasible. Without the HOA, there is no way to enforce no parking on the street. And to say that they're not going to do an HOA is not logical. An HOA is clearly required for this development where you have many houses sharing common property. We have a draft that sits there in the file that our council commented on way back in August. And we were supposed to have gotten a draft of the revised one, and it was understood that if the Attorney General had problems with the comments that were related to parking or to the reference to the restrictive deck related to the roadbed and utilities maintenance, the AG could always excise it. So we weren't saying, go to the AG's office, get this approved, all of that. But and not a single word was mentioned about this lengthy discussion at the last hearing in any of the submissions, in the submission. And I do want to say that the purpose of an offering plan that's reviewed by the AG has many purposes, but one of them is to advise owners of the risks. So what's a risk here? The risk is that someday you may be responsible for maintaining the road that's in front of your property. And you may be responsible even for the utilities because in a moment of terrible fiscal struggle, the city may just say, you know what? Hands off of all the privately held roads. And so that's a risk that's required to be disclosed to purchasers. So the idea of saying that it shouldn't be in the HOA seems disingenuous to me, and if anything, is just avoiding a disclosure, which, by the way, is not permitted. So what I would like to suggest is that in order to get this out of here, we vote on this and make the decision conditioned on receipt prior to issuance of the resolution of an acceptable draft of the HOA, which includes the no parking restriction already stated in its own section 9.14, and which includes reference to the restrictive deck for roadway maintenance that must be recorded prior to resolution issuance, and it would just be a draft of the HOA, not one that's approved by the AG. Okay, it's the only thing I can think of to move this out.
Okay.
I'd just like to add that this case is 3 years old, and that it may not be indicative of how the board is ruling moving forward on these matters.
In terms of letting somebody not provide,
In
no.
terms of being a GCL 36.
It's
Oh.
been under review by the board
It's been under
for
review for
4
3 years.
years.
Yeah, right, well, yeah. I mean, this is an unusual situation
yeah.
where you've got houses facing other houses on an existing street. What makes the street crazy is it's got a curb cut and, not a curb cut, a curb
To the
before you,
street.
to the street.
Before the street.
So it's like no one has been minding the street store, so then you might ask, seriously? Department of Transportation is in charge of this street and they allow a curb there? That's why, that's part of, and allow the sidewalks to be used as gardens by other residents on the block? That's why I look at this as kind of an abandoned, non-DOT managed street. So, okay.
Okay.
Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 13, 2016-4265BZ, 25 Bleecker Street, Manhattan.
Okay, so we did receive a set of drawings that shows now the cellar and first floor built full to the rear lot line, and the upper portions holding an as-of-right 19-foot rear yard, which is what we've directed them to do. But what's missing from the drawings, unless I just can't find it, and I asked for it at 2 of the hearings, the note on the drawings that indicates there's an E designation on the site for hazmat, and that there's an LP restrictive deck that's recorded against the property. Yeah, it's supposed to mention it. The reason for mentioning it on the drawings is to alert DOB that it's an E-designated site and that there's a restricted deck for LPC, right? And then a condition, of course, is that the LPC restrictive deck must be recorded prior to issuance of the resolution.
Continued hearings, item number 14, 43-11BZ, 1926 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, the last hearing was adjourned to enable the architect to attend and respond to comments. We had asked for a copy of the approved DOB plans. That would be a set with a DOB approval stamp on them. We instead receive a set labeled, quote, approved, but that's not the same thing. The issue is what is currently on site, a legal condition according to DOB. So in an effort of self-help, I went on to Biz and found the ZD1 that appears to match the set described as approved by DOB. So maybe they match. The job does not appear to have been self-certified, but the architect should verify. I think the pre-fire, pre-existing plan set that was provided is irrelevant in this case. The idea here is that enough of the DOB approved and compliant building is constructed. That is the existing building upon which we base this review. The front wall of the proposed second floor is being replaced with new, but doesn't appear to be moving. So what's the reason for its replacement? Section 812 shows that wall to remain and shows the attic wall existing. So there's a discrepancy, and I don't really know whether that wall is being removed. That doesn't make sense. With respect to the floor area in the attic, I'm not sure that DOB allows for structural headroom to be counted, to count a drop ceiling, in which case more of the attic would be floor area. We will only allow one FAR, so the plans should indicate that is the maximum permitted. and that DOB will determine whether the area shown in the attic correctly measures for floor area. Just a note on the drawings, DOB to determine the floor area of the attic. Maximum floor area for this building is 1. So, 1 FAR. I'd like to understand the justification for the 20, we didn't get any, and that's standard, justification for the 24-foot 10 rear yard for 3 stories. That's just a standard review requirement. And where are the photos showing the as-built conditions and surrounding neighborhood conditions? We didn't get them, and I know that those were asked for in the notice of comments way back when and was ignored. Also, where are the calculations of the existing exterior walls and joists to remain? That's a standard requirement. Also asked for, I believe, in the notice of comments. And the BSA zoning calculation sheet, every single application has one of those. Where is it? The comparison chart, and I mentioned a lot of those comments at the last review session, so this is quite confusing not to have received them. The comparison chart prepared by the engineer of record indicates that the building as approved by DOB and as built has an FAR of 0.8. I don't understand how that's possible if the maximum FAR, including the area in the attic under the slope roof, is 0.6. So either that's a typo or something's wrong. DOB approved a set of drawings that are not legal. Notably, what is actually built on the site, which shows a continuous front wall without a setback, it doesn't look like the as-builts. So as-builts are called as-builts for a reason. It was what is built, but the drawings don't look like reality. So please eliminate my confusion. And again, the architect must attend or we adjourn, because I don't want to have a conversation with a lawyer about architecture in this, particularly in this case, well, in all cases, but particularly in this case.
I have a couple of comments. Simple one is per plan submitted, DOB approved plan maintains a 49-foot rear yard as opposed to that stated in the statement of fact, so that needs to be corrected. I was a little confused with the attic plan. I agree that the condition of 1 FAR kind of takes this attic, how you measure the attic plan out of our hand. But just the way it is being shown, it shows that the 2 bedrooms are being counted in the floor area, but when you look at the elevation and the roof line, the section of where the roof is sloping over the bedroom is the same slope that is continuing to the new extended area, which is all counted as not part of the attic area. So I'm just concerned how those can be legal bedrooms, habitable space, if they don't have the proper amount of headroom clearance. And that itself may just reduce the floor area count, but the plan indicates those as bedrooms. So I think that's just something we need to be careful about, that we are not allowing anything that is non-habitable space to be habitable space.
So that's the thing, is we can't really regulate this. The only thing that zoning resolution says is structural headroom, depending on which district you're in, 5 or 8 feet. And then after that, it's floor area, right? So, and then in terms of habitable rooms, then you go to a section in the building code, and habitable rooms have a minimum height, I think, of 7'6".
Right.
And maybe it's a percentage of the room that has to be 7'6", I don't know, because as you know, people live in attics all the time. And they always have some point at which all you can put is a dresser and you hit your head every time you go get socks, right? So, yeah, but that's a building code question.
I was just going to say we could ask them to put on the attic floor the maximum floor area that they're considering now, so that if DOB turns anything else into floor area, then they just have to reduce the bulk of the attic, one way, shape, or form to conform to that max.
Okay, that's good.
We're still missing the FEMA map. I didn't see it. looked at it like 3 times in different folders, but I couldn't see it.
Oh, I'm certain that they didn't give it, so, because they didn't give so many other things.
May I please call item 13?
Wait, we're not done. Put on the end floor, then I floor, there we have.
I have no information.
Okay. Sorry, what did you want to do?
May I call item 13 again, because your request, they satisfied it with a note. I just want to explain add some additional
We
information.
can talk about it at the hearing. We don't need to, if they put the note in, they can talk about it at the hearing. We don't have to reopen it. Okay. Or reconsider it.
Okay. Item number 15, 2017-20BZ, 550 Fifth Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. Yeah, that's being administratively adjourned.
Okay. Item number 16, 2017-34BZ, 311 Adams Avenue, Staten Island.
Also adjourned, they requested an adjournment.
Item number 17, 2018-8BZ, 1820 Cropsey Avenue, Brooklyn.
Also requested an adjournment.
Item number 18, 2018-53BZ, 104 DeGraw Street, Brooklyn.
We have some new letters of support that were submitted since the last hearing in January. 5 of them, I just note like where they're from. Sometimes it's interesting. 5 of them are from the same person who owns 4 properties on the block, and 1 on the block to the south, and actually was the seller of the subject property to the current owner, so good for him, you know, goosey gander. 9 are from persons who appear to be related to the owner of the subject site, because they all have the same last name, and own 9 properties on the subject block or nearby. At the last hearing, commissioners expressed skepticism about whether the 35 by 100 vacant lot is unique. The provided cover letter states that the revised statement of facts and statement of findings elaborates on this, but I didn't find that it improved the argument in any noticeable way. And unlike many sites in M districts where the complaints are about adjacent uses and narrow roadways, this site is on a block predominated by commercial use with a 2-way 60-foot wide street with relatively heavy commercial access. You actually see trucks barreling down. And that argument always assumes a manufacturing use when office, restaurant, or community facility uses are possibilities here. So I think the site is well suited to a commercial use actually, and there are many large vacant lots on this block that may soon be developed with conforming manufacturing buildings. The statement of facts and cover letter contradict themselves when stating that the proposed building isn't purpose-built and could be sold or rented to separate tenants, one residential and one commercial. So that cuts directly against the argument that's later made that the project being adjacent to a residential use would be more attractive since it is live-work. No, actually, because you might rent it separately and the upstairs office tenant or downstairs office tenant would be disturbed, arguably, by the resident or vice versa, and so therefore less desirable. So they're contradicting themselves within a few paragraphs of each other. And anyway, since when is an office use incompatible with adjacent residential uses? It is a common New York City phenomenon, not to mention restaurants and retail uses with residential adjacency. Lots of people live above a restaurant, and many people live in buildings with offices on the lower floors and residents above, hotels on the lower floors, residents above, et cetera. So I think this is a situation where the problem complained of is actually the zoning, not the site itself. M1 districts, I admit, have too little as-of-right floor area, but that's really the city planning's job to fix. And in any event, the proposed office use design spreads the allowable FAR onto 2 floors, which would make the project more attractive to a more hip tenant than a 1-story structure would. In the same way that there are double-height spaces that don't count as floor area, but make greater ceiling height and amenities in the proposed, that could be done for the as of right. Plus, the accessory parking portion and mechanical spaces don't count as floor area, so that would lift the building off the first floor and make it a much more desirable office structure. And I have to say that I really would be more sympathetic if this were only a request for a little more FAR to maintain commercial uses on the site. You know, what's the argument? Really, mostly, I don't actually know what the argument is, except to say that I agree that 1 FAR isn't enough in this day and age. And as to the board's grant at 9698 DeGraw, which is down the street, which allowed residential, economic models have changed actually since 2013. Office use in these areas has become more attractive. The way people work and the types of offices they work in have changed. These Brooklyn neighborhoods have changed. The board is adjusting to these realities and is seeing development potential that may not have existed before. It's very similar to when we look in the West 20s, where there were residential variances granted and no one looked at the value of the development rights in the 70s because nobody was building hotels in the 70s. No one was transferring development rights for that kind of phenomenon. It didn't exist. And so when we look at it, you know, all of these years later, hotels in those districts are desirable, right? So now thinking back, one should have looked at the value of the development rights, but how could one have projected that they would eventually have value in a hotel? And so the same way here, how could one have projected that people would rent tiny, tiny desk space, 150 square foot offices, and pay huge amounts of money for those little offices? We had an application like that where it was really just a floor area request to maintain commercial use. So this is all a new phenomenon in the last 5 years, I have to say. Any others? Yes.
I actually was convinced by their argument that they had presented regarding the uniqueness. I felt that they made a convincing argument with regards to why an office space, an as-of-right office space, would not be attracting the office tenants because they need the flexibility of a space where they can lease out when there is a time of business shrinking. They have the ability to work with other existing office tenants to kind of share office spaces and others and not have to rely on other outside tenants to look for a space. And I do, like, I know of situations where there are firms where they share common areas, and the larger the office footprint is, more easier it is to find those common sharing points, and then you share individual spaces. So that allows for room for flexibility, whereas in a smaller office space, it has to be for a very specific business type. Otherwise, having a generic office space may not work. And I was convinced by that, and I was okay with it. And when I went to the site, that block frontage has residential buildings, most of it with all of the abutting properties were residential. The building next to it is a new residential building. And we approved another one that is at the corner to the western of the block. So I thought there is a change that is happening in terms of the use, though the zoning is not there, but and the market is not there for the office or retail space. It's more of a residential. And it's not, it is heavily trafficked for those vehicles that are going into the Navy Yard and other things, but not a place where people will walk to the restaurant. I at least have not seen foot traffic that much whenever I visit that site. So I was okay with it.
I tend to agree with the chair. I'm not convinced by the uniqueness finding. It's really interesting because when one talks about not being able to use a site for conforming use in an M1 district, throughout history, we've looked at lots that are 25 feet by 100 feet or smaller or narrower. and have said, okay, this is not going to have a large enough floor plate for a viable manufacturing business. But as the chair has said, I agree, times have changed, and now there's a new type of office model that just might work in this situation, and it hasn't really been explored because the as-of-right office that they actually are showing is a very standard, one-story, full lot coverage, basic, plain old building. And when you look at the different types of offices that are actually showing up in the Columbia Heights area, they're kind of more hip kind of offices, split level buildings and that kind of thing, very similar to what they're proposing for their office space in the proposed scenario. So I think that first and foremost, if they were going to go down the avenue of discussing the uniqueness, the as-of-right office has to be more akin to the office that's going to be in the proposal. Kind of an office that is made, that's creatively laid out to be made attractive to different types of office users that aren't the standard user before, rows and rows of desks with the center aisle, that kind of a thing. And has to be geared more towards, you know, probably a creative user or an artistic user. So that being said, I also then looked at the 35-foot wide scenario as being unique, and it really isn't very unique when you look at that block. More than half of the lots in the radius diagram are 35 feet or less, and even less in depth than the 100-foot that they're showing. So I'm not sure that there is a uniqueness, and so therefore, to me, A is still very much in play. Then when I looked at the financials, I wasn't very convinced by the responses that they gave to me, most specifically with the residential, because I'm always really very watchful when the applicant is valuing a townhouse apartment as if it's a simplex apartment and really minimizing the amount of income you could get. They're saying that the odd layout of the apartment with the bedrooms spread out on different floors and the dominant stairway and elevator core are listed as reasons why this apartment isn't comparable to more of the high-end apartments, one of which I had quoted at the last hearing, which was 69 Columbia Street. So what they do is they say, well, you know, we don't agree with what the commissioner said, but we'll raise the rent to $8,000 monthly, but we don't see anything else other than that one apartment that was quoted. So of course, you know, to me, that's just a challenge. So I then went on the web and I went on Corcoran and I saw that there are other apartments in the area that are as expensive as 69 Columbia Street at $11,000 monthly, or even more expensive. So I'm going to list them. 96 DeGraw Street, which is the brand-new townhouse next door, is actually for rent $15,000 a month. Same kind of creative, sort of split-level floor plate as this, dominated by a staircase, only 96 DeGraw does not have an elevator. This has an elevator. So that's one of them. And the size is approximately the same, 3,400 square feet. There's also 170 DeGraw Street, which is $8,500 monthly. There's also 135 Sackett Street, which is a duplex and a townhouse with 2,100 square feet, and that's the lowest at $7,900 a month, and that's a little bit more than half the size of the apartment that's here. So I urge the applicant to actually go back and rethink how they're valuing the rent that they could get for that, to me, very nice townhouse. So also, I re-looked at the office analysis because they kind of didn't address my comments when I said that the comparables for the as-of-right office didn't look as if they were for an as-of-right office building. They looked like they were industrial comparables, and so they didn't really address it. So I went back and I looked at it, and basically it seems to me that what they were saying was that the proposed office comps look more like the fancy office comparable pictures that they showed, and they added on different percentages for design and configuration flexibility and potential for the single user live work, and then a landscape and open space, and that's actually what brought the proposed office rent up to $55 a square foot, which is basically saying that the beautiful office comps that we saw were actually at the same price as those mundane, boring office comps for the as of right. So then I was like, okay, it's fine that they didn't address that issue, because I just looked at it more carefully, and then they showed the reason why they actually upgraded the proposed office rent to $55 a square foot was really the add-ons that the financial analysts added onto the rent that was already like $35 a square foot, which is the same rent that they showed me on the other comps that would really look like they were industrial, but they were office, they were $35 a square foot too. So that led me to make the comment that I just made, seconding your comment, that's like, okay, well, let that as-of-right office building be just as beautifully designed as the office in the proposed scenario, and then you could assign the $55 a square foot rent, because then those add-ons would apply to the as-of-right as well. And those are basically my comments.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Yep. So I will start from where Commissioner Ari Brown finished. I did look at one of the as-of-right scenarios, which I believe the negative return is just 450 grand negative. And I believe this scenario, if they work on it a little bit, it could catch up. The reason I'm saying that is because of two things. Number one, I've seen $75,000 to $90,000 for remediation cost. It's not in the construction cost estimate, but it's in the list. I don't know why it was taken off the construction cost estimate and it was placed on the pro forma, I believe. So first of all, we need to get explanations for why we have $75,000 to $90,000 for remediation. What kind of remediation is this? And second, I did ask for explanations on the quantities. This is not a huge site. The construction is not very complicated, so it probably in 2-3 hours max, somebody could actually provide explanations for the quantities, for the pricing. I don't have too many comments on the pricing, on the unit prices. However, one or two items like the structural steel, the unit price is $4 per pound, which means it's $8,000 per ton. This is kind of high, but I need to get explanations on the quantities as per the requirements of our posting before. And more important, they are talking about pile foundation, helical piles. I did ask last hearing for explanations on the number of piles, and I got nothing this hearing. Yes, I got the geotechnical report, I got a foundation plan, but with this foundation plan, I need explanations on why do you need 80 piles or Desillium piles. They need to provide that to convince me that the cost for the foundation system is legit. Another thing that I noticed that they mentioned in the statement of facts, last submission, that they cannot build a cellar. And one of my comments was, last hearing was, I believe you put on your own plans that the adjacent two buildings, right and left, they have cellars. In this submission, the word west cellar, it says 3-story building, west cellar, previously, it said that. In this submission, west cellar is taken off. However, I like walked down the block a little bit and I see that the survey still says west cellar. So is it with or without? And if it's with, why it's taken out? That's not a good indication here. So I need clarifications on this. If the adjacent two buildings have cellars, why wouldn't you be able to build a cellar? It would help you make, like I said, the as-of-right number 2 option. It could make this option more feasible, could bring it to a feasible project.
And if it had cellar, then it's filled, then that space is filled with rubble, which they need to remove anyway, if they're going to do the construction with helical piles?
If they need to dig to the cellar finished floor, and after that,
No, what I'm saying is, they're arguing we can't have a cellar for whatever reason. So, but if you have, if the former cellars of the existing buildings are filled with rubble, which is normally the case, right? It's just like abandoned, they clean up the site, right? Don't they have to remove the rubble in
I
order
got
to
it.
make the,
Digging the
drill the?
cellar, digging the cellar would make it easier. If it's tough to put the helical piles without the cellar, it's tough to put them with the cellar. Probably digging for the cellar, if you have big boulders at the top 10, 15 feet of the subsurface, and you dig a cellar and you remove that, it's much easier to put the helical piles in place. Since they want to put them without the cellar, I believe it would be much easier to put them with the cellar construction. But my understanding, for the reason that they said we cannot build a cellar, is because of the groundwater, high groundwater, something like that. It's not because of big boulders existing, because if they said that in the previous submission, my response to this would be like, if you have boulders in place and you dig a cellar, that would make it much easier to build that cellar.
Yeah, but I don't think they have boulders, this is a
I think, yeah,
land.
No,
site.
it's,
Loose sandy soil. is
yeah, exactly, yes.
Suggesting.
They gave me like a, I would call it geotechnical letter with the TR forms, with the boring lots. I'm not saying they don't need piles. I believe the top portion of the subsurface is not that good. But if you add a cellar, if you're putting the same foundation system either way, and you add a cellar, probably that would help you increase your income. So probably it would bring the project to a feasible project. And regarding the uniqueness, I'm struggling with the uniqueness claim on this side. I have seen, like, I looked at their submission, and I see too many sites with the same width. 35 feet width is not a small site. We'd be looking at sites with 12 feet width.
Right.
So 35 is a decent width. It's not the best, but it's workable.
Also, it's not just talking about absolute width, it's relative width. Like
Yeah.
Commissioner Otley Brown was saying, a lot more than half, or sorry, Commissioner Tanya was saying, more than half.
I was saying that.
Commissioner Otley Brown was saying more than half of the sites in the area are 35 feet.
Yep,
So-
I understand.
Yeah.
And I think also to make the distinction is that when we have looked at 15-foot, has been mostly in residential areas, corner lots, where the requirements are such that once you take out the front yards and others, it leaves extremely little footprint for a residential floor plate. And whereas in the manufacturing is, we have looked at sites that are not 15 feet, generally a little bit bigger. And there's a question of what is a reasonable size that one needs for a reasonable operation for a non-residential use, whether that be manufacturing an office space. And I don't, definitely 15-foot doesn't work for a non-residential use, but and neither does 25, but I'm at least based on the documents provided, I'm convinced that 35 also doesn't work in this case. But I'm not saying that applies for a residential site. I'm just saying it doesn't work for a manufacturing
Or
and
a
office type of
commercial, we
use.
always say manufacturing, it's a commercial
Commercial,
use. That's the
commercial, yeah.
critical difference.
Yeah, I agree.
I believe we should be very careful looking at sites like this. The idea here is we don't want to be like rezoning
Right.
what is already zoned. If whoever city agency believe that these kind of sites, the 35, 25, 40 feet wide sites are no longer like suitable for certain uses, they should start looking into these and rezone them.
And they
But-
may, given the nature of the changes that are happening, at some point they may.
Yeah. But my point is, we want to be careful.
We are not
Doing
pushing
that.
it, we are not pushing it. Yeah.
Yeah, we want to be careful doing that.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I did hear it, we've been accused of rezoning the city, and we don't want to be accused of something like that. We're not rezoning the city, we're looking at cases case by case, and if we believe that a certain site could work without variance is not need to be granted.
So I
And
just
that's
wanted to quickly just finish the one comment that you made about the commercial, the office scenario
Yeah.
being viable. I do agree with Commissioner Sheta. I think it's, if you were just to even on the income side, adjust the income up by $5 a square foot, you would have a scenario that is borderline viable, because with a 6% cap rate, it shows that there would be a 6% return, which is on the bottom end of acceptable returns for office, but still just within the threshold of viability. So just a few adjustments in correcting the income, and especially if you make the adjustments on the cost side and decreasing the construction costs, could make this a viable
And
scenario.
is that with the
So-
seller? Is that with the addition of the seller?
No,
Without.
no, this is
I-
not. This is just in saying, let's look at a more creative layout of a commercial office building to match up with the as-of right, so that you can get more income per square foot, like they suggest, with the different adjustments they make for the more creative layout. And then take into account Commissioner Sheta's statements that there may be need to decrease the construction costs based on his criteria that he identified that he still had questions about. So I'm saying that it's fairly close. It could be a situation that is viable.
That was actually, that was answer to my question at the very, I'm not sure if you looked at it, but I did put here, how about income? So I believe, based on my review for the construction cost, if the 90 grand for the environmental thing is taken off, because I don't see any thing in the statement of facts mentioning that it was a contamination, otherwise it should have been like a totally different story here. In addition to some exaggerations on the quantities and the cost, the pricing for the items, I believe the cost could be tweaked, could be brought down by probably 200 to 300 grand. If this number, in conjunction with the adjustment of the income, can bring this option, the as-of-right number 2, the commercial one, into play, I believe we have a feasible project.
So I just want to add, though, that if you do the HIP office version, arguably that's a more expensive construction project than the not HIP version, except to say double height spaces don't really cost more, or a little bit extra exterior material, right? But double height spaces are part of what makes a place HIP, right?
Right, but right now, the mixed use proposed is $303 a square foot, and that's including the residential portion of the building, which has finishes, and the office is right now around $293 a square foot for a building that's half the size. So even if you were to increase it by $10 a square foot for the lesser square feet, it's not going to be that much of an increase in construction costs that you might not be able to overcome with a rental rate that you then bump up to $55 a square foot. So that's why it's like, we need to see it, but we're just letting the applicant know these are things that we see that could be a game changer in terms of them having a successful argument for a variance.
Right, but that's also, it's important because often we see applicants make the B finding in an effort to give us an A, like that the B is really
Right.
the A, but the B is not the A, the B
Right.
follows the A.
Yeah.
First, you need to decide it's unique.
Right.
So.
I agree with you
yeah,
there. It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
not enough to address the B comments and go, ta-da, we did it. You
Right.
can't do it.
Because almost
Yeah.
every site would qualify under a B for something better that it doesn't get, like 3 times the FAR is definitely a better B than the 1 time the FAR.
Right.
And it's much easier to prove the B than the A,
Yes,
actually.
yes.
Definitely.
Which is
You play with-
fortunately why there's
You play
an
with
A.
some numbers,
Right.
and you get it. Just
Exactly.
tweak the construction cost, play with some income numbers, and you get the B.
Right, I agree with you. It's definitely important to square away the A with us non-believers first.
Okay, anything else?
No, that's-
Mr. Shiveta, did you want to add anything?
No, I was going to state about, I'd like to first be convinced on the A. There may be an A argument here, I don't think they've made it.
Seeing none?
Yeah.
Item number 19, 2018-52BZ, 159 Borum Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. We just keep in mind that the next application is related in terms of discussion, but we look at them separately, okay? All right. So, okay. The applicant provided a parking analysis that concludes the number of parking spaces provided, provided back in the day, satisfied section 2525. Hence, the building was constructed with, quote, with hashtag income restricted housing units. It's kind of deductive reasoning because in fact, they didn't provide enough parking spaces according to 2525, but they never would have gotten away with providing so few spaces if it was subject to standard parking regulations. They would have been under by about 50% of the spaces,
Can I add to that? What was interesting is, and I kind of had a vague history, but I wasn't sure that it is part of a former urban renewal plan.
Yeah.
Lindsay Bushwick urban renewal plan. What I would like the applicant to verify was, as part of this Lindsay Bushwick urban renewal plan, was there an LSRD, large-scale residential development? Because there were urban renewal plans that had an LSRD associated with it, and if they did, that would have specified the floor area and the parking requirements, and that may also speak to why the number of parking spaces. And that is also important for the second reason, because LSRD it goes in perpetuity with the land, so one would need to modify LSRD, and there's a different process to it, which is, I don't know if it has changed, but I remember I started that process back when I was at city planning with some of those Upper West Side urban renewal plans, where it required a text amendment in the LSRD section that allowed you to modify the LSRD that were in a former urban renewal plan. I don't know if that process has been simplified or not, but it would behoove them to kind of verify that.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so, and then to continue on that thought. So the parking layout was revised with more parking on the first floor that's in an unenclosed area. That was to respond to a DOB comment about the parking layout. So I'm looking at it, and this obviously must be valet parking, but I don't actually understand how it would work, and I'm not sure that it was intended to be valet parking. The spaces on the first floor that were added now block entirely the access to the ramp to the cellar. So how is that any different than having parking on the ramp, which DOB wouldn't allow? And how is that any, and then based on the change to the cellar level, it seems as if DOB was not okay with crowding the cellar with stray cars. So why would they be okay with crowding the first floor entry level with cars? And I don't see then where are the reservoir spaces. Anything that might be a reservoir is filled up now with parking spaces. The as-of-right plan shows the clear demarcation of the travel lane, but the proposed doesn't show a travel lane because it's actually filled with cars, so I actually don't see how that even works. A copy of the 1980 regulatory agreement was provided. It expires in 2021 or 22. The 2016 City Council resolution, which I found online, but which was not submitted with the materials, even though they said it was, or if it was, I can't find it, and needs to be submitted.
It was in the original submission.
I looked in the original submission, it's a different city council, so there are two city council votes. There's the city council vote to allow the current developer to purchase these lots, and then there's another city council vote that allowed for the continuation of the tax.
Article 11.
Yeah, so of the tax reduction, abatement, thank you. But it isn't clear whether for me, that city council resolution, which is just simply an act of the council which says, we're okay with tax abatement continuing. That's not the same thing as the contract that says, okay, tax abated, that you would show to the IRS or whoever, right? Or New York State Taxation Department. So it's not clear to me that that extends the agreement's effectiveness, since by the regulatory agreement's own terms, it expires in like a year. So unless there's an addendum or something.
Specifically stated in a contract.
Right, so there's no contractual thing extending the rights to, extending the regulatory agreement. So I disagree that the city council's simple act extends the agreement. It's not how contracts work.
It may, but we'd like to see that contract to see.
No,
what
no, no, the
terms
point
are.
is, the city council votes. That's not an extension of a contract. That's simply a statement that the council has no objection to this abatement continuing. But the abatement only works if a regulatory agreement is in place. The regulatory agreement expires in a year or something. So therefore, it needs to be extended. We see those all the time recorded against property, so I didn't see one. So that's the first question. And the city council resolution notably also allows for the expiration of the regulatory agreement under certain terms. And we had wanted assurances that the term was extended. So, you know, the regulatory agreement as a standalone doesn't protect us. That's why we want the restrictive declaration. And so to that point, the applicant says in their papers that they're still working on the restrictive deck with our council.
They emailed me this morning at 9:30 with copies saying that they were concurrently being reviewed by the applicant. I haven't looked at them.
So that's the thing. So, I mean, we gave them a lot of time to be able to go work, do the back and forth, and in essence, we got an incomplete submission. It's kind of premature to be talking about this, other than the fact that I don't know how the parking works. And those were my comments. Anybody else? Okay.
Just kind of want to, there is a tie-in, and this is where I'm not myself very clear. When City Council grants the Article 11 and the restrictive covenant, there is some tie-in, and I think the applicant should clarify that.
Oh, sorry, what do you mean a tie-in?
This, again, this is the part I'm not clear of, because I was never involved in, at HPD on that, but when an Article 11 is granted, it is almost, there is a way whereby it becomes an executive order in some way.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I myself can't explain it, but
Right.
I think it would be helpful for the applicant to kind of walk us through the
Right.
process and what the commitments and the requirements are and how that is enacted.
But just because it's just kind of, again, basic contract law, an act of the legislature gives the authority to do something, right? So now there's an authority. But there was an agreement. The agreement is the contract between the regulatory agency, i.e. HPD, and the owner of the property. And that agreement expires. So they need to simply extend it. And you see urban renewal plans, for example, get extended or had been extended all the time, right? When they expire, they must be actively extended or they aren't extended. And it's not just the act of the legislature that allows that. It's also a recording of the extension of the urban renewal plan. So it's just kind of basic, my understanding and your understanding. We both sign a piece of paper and we move ahead, right? So, okay. Anything, any other comment? No?
Great. Item number 2018-55BZ, 222 Johnson Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, so I don't know if we can copy paste, but it's all the same comments about the regulatory agreement that we had on the first one. In other words, that I'll just summarize it and we can assume copy paste, right? That we still don't have clarity that the regulatory agreement has been extended. And at the same time, we still need a restricted declaration, as discussed at the prior hearing, that commits the property owner to maintain the existing building with income-restricted units. And just their letter saying, you know, I promise I will because that'll be a good thing for me, isn't the same as a cloud on title that requires it. So then, with respect to the parking study, because that was the big issue for us, they revised the parking study, which shows a demand of 63 spaces, where they apply the combined census tract data, and only 43 spaces with only the tract in which the site is located, and then 28 spaces is based on projects in the area and their utilization rates. With the 4 other sites used in the study, I'd like clarity on whether that on-site parking was offered free to the tenants, because that's often enough reason for people to not want to sign up for a parking space. And when using that one census tract, I'd like the traffic consultant to explain the disparities between the adjacent tracts. For example, tract 491, which is immediately adjacent to the subject tract, and actually closer to the trains, J, M, and G trains, so it's got really good train service, has a 19% auto mode share, while tract 485, which has areas far from the subway, has a 19.3% auto modal split. So I'm curious about that. Does that have to do with the economics of the area and that people can't afford cars, that's why they're lower, or explain it? And for instance, where you have almost 20% and you're right near the subway, is that because it's a wealthier area and people have cars even though they don't need them? So, or, aren't required to have them to get anywhere. So the subject site is a block from the L train, so very well served by, when the L train's working well, good transportation. So I just want to know what the other commissioners think about those utilization rates, and whether, relying on the lowest one would be okay, because otherwise we have a parking shortfall.
Well, I was actually wondering the same thing, although to me it wasn't as critical with the other case where they were supplying their demand and had
right.
excess. But I felt here that if it was being skewed by the lowest income people, that probably wouldn't hold true any longer, because we're talking about market rate apartments here, and that's going to bring the influx of higher income people. So that's going to kind of toss out that assumption.
Right.
So that was my only issue with the analysis done here.
Right, and so to that point, those other buildings that are being used as an example, what's the income mix?
Right.
Right.
Right, okay.
Item number 21, 2018-64BZ, and, 2018-65A, 725 Mobile Road, Queens.
Sorry, lots of notes. Okay, the applicant submitted what I thought was a very well-researched memorandum of law. That's what a lawyer writes like, as opposed to the last one that we got on the same case. However, it insists that we must show deference to a religious institution even when the hardship complained of was created by the current fee owner, who is not even yet a predecessor in title, and even though the 20-foot wide roadway that is the only means of access to this site is inadequate for fire department access when cars are parked along the curbside, which curbside parking cannot be eliminated, and not a single parking space for the congregation is provided on site. And even though the proposed building is absolutely out of scale with the surrounding community, and the congregation just refuses to reduce the building size in spite of its apparent ability to do so, since, as the board has stated in prior hearings, the seat count exceeds the size of the congregation. So applicant relies heavily on the St. Albans case to support their argument for deference in the face of self-created hardship. The St. Albans case stands for the proposition that a contract vendee can apply for a variance. I don't think we actually dispute that here. The court in St. Albans was not asked to consider whether the combination of the two lots of record into one created the hardship complained of. Hence, we have no direction from the court in that regard, The the Patrick v. Village of Russell Gardens case, which was also cited, and was also discussed at the last hearing because it was cited by another applicant, or let's
Same
say,
applicant.
the same attorney in another case. That case was about a hardship being improperly claimed where existing tax lots in common ownership had been used in common, so should have been treated as a single lot, and its subdivision would therefore have created the hardship complained of. If anything, Patrick supports the position stated by several commissioners that the hardship complained of has been created by the subdivision. In addition, the court in St. Albans cites to an important aspect of the deference standard. It says, a local zoning board is required to, quote, suggest measures to accommodate the proposed religious use while mitigating the adverse effects on the surrounding community to the greatest extent possible, unquote, and it's citing to another case, which I didn't copy here. Here, the board has, quote, suggested measures to mitigate the impacts of the proposal, and the applicant has simply refused to respond to them. So in addition to failing on the D finding, the applicant fails on the C and the E findings. And we were ready at the last hearing, actually, to close this and have received the applicant's final argument, and I think should now close and vote this out, and everybody, it falls however it falls. Other comments? No? Anybody else? Okay.
Item number 22, 2018-95 BZ, 120 Avenue and Brooklyn.
The proposed project has been revised, and it's actually grown by more than 3,000 square feet. I'm confused by their decision to do this at this stage of the game because it assumes the amount of floor area initially requested can be justified in the first place. At least in the prior version, the fourth floor was set back significantly from East 2nd Street. Now the setback is drastically reduced. The argument for deference under Cornell, and this is the Rehabilitation Center for Disabled People. The argument for deference under Cornell cites to many cases, including Asharokin v. Pitasi, 1986, which was a riding academy that claimed it qualified as a school for zoning purposes. The second department held that it did not qualify because, as it states, that the program, the Riding Academy, lacks the structure, regularity of attendance, and progression of instruction necessary to constitute a school. So, and further to that, in Paul Jean Realty and in the case called Rory, the operators and counselors of the summer program were held to be a school for zoning purposes because the majority of the faculty consisted of well-respected educators and graduate students conducting courses similar to those offered by a school during the regular calendar year. And in addition to which, as is stated in the memorandum that the applicant provided, had a curriculum, a plan consisting of adequate physical facilities, and a qualified staff to carry into effect its educational objectives. So I just ask simply, can the HASC Center establish that it meets the tests imposed on the Sandpiper Riding School in Paul Jean and, I don't know how to pronounce that, Paul Jean and Rory? However, to be clear, I agree with the Supreme Court's decision in Clifton Park and Saratoga Associates, and that the educational needs of those with developmental difficulties should be treated differently from those without. In that court, I actually like what the court said, so I'll read it. It says, at bottom, so the petitioners were opposed to one of these developmental rehab centers, and it said, at bottom, if the petitioner's conditions are accepted, general education would refer to mainstream students only. And should those less fortunate therefore be treated differently? Clearly, the answer must be no. They too need a general education. and their educational experience must be tailored to suit their peculiar needs. The therapeutic and educational needs of retarded citizens cannot be neatly distinguished. If their educational needs include concomitant therapy rather than field trips to museums, planetaria, and orchestral performances, that fact must be understood and accepted. So the explanation of the need for medical facilities in connection with the habilitation program makes logical sense to me, but the chart provided in the statement of fact with a list of centers that are stated to be comprised of such combinations is not supported by any backup material. It's just raw data, and we don't know that they have medical facilities there. So they need to get us brochures or something to show us that those centers are associated with medical facilities. I thought the typical patient profiles were very helpful at understanding how the center operates for a day hab. I would like one for the community hab, though, that I didn't understand as well. There's a conflict in the statement of facts about who uses the medical clinical programs. It states that this is primarily for day hab participants, not for community hab on page 29, but on page 30, it states that community hab uses it too. And there is also a contradiction in treatment theory. The statement of fact states that it is better if people don't travel for their medical and clinical treatment, which results in healthier people, in other words, that it's nearby, which results in healthier people and less need for medical care. It later states that day hab people require more frequent visits. So I'm confused that they contradict each other, those statements, unless I'm missing the subtleties. They should explain better what is involved to operate what they call the pre-vocational program, work readiness program, and supportive employment program. It actually looks like there's only 2 rooms devoted to that, so I don't know why they kind of go on about it. The text says that the pre-vocational program is a factory-like setting with, quote, hands-on vocational training. I don't know, I don't understand how and where that operates. Maybe it's all off-site, but they didn't explain. Why is that a factory-like setting if it's off-site in a factory? That's actually a factory setting as opposed to like. The utilization charts appear to show many fewer people, both participants and staff, than claimed. They should explain this. The charts also isolate rooms per page rather than per floor. So it is difficult to understand actual utilization rates. It's isolating rooms not per page, I think it's per subject. And how many persons per classrooms, for example. They don't explain how each of these rooms are actually used out of the number of participants, especially for the day hab, how many people fit in each one of these, because for me, actually, it kind of looks like they take the size of the site and they say, we have all this to play with, so let's fill it up with stuff. And so that's not good because it's a very, very large building on the site. The statement of fact states that 5 persons can work in an occupational therapy and a physical therapy room at a time, while the chart actually shows that 10 can. Also, the type of occupancy isn't clear in these charts. Is it a staff member or a participant that's creating the occupancies? It's not separated. And plus, some of the occupancies must be simultaneous, but are not indicated as such. So you're adding up like people sitting in the waiting room, they end up in exam rooms, so you don't double count those people. And the same for a conference room. Conference rooms are filled with people who are working there, so you don't double count those people. And the area on the third floor described in the statement of facts as an indoor replacement for outdoor recreation area is actually described in the programmatic needs report as training programs for staff. So something's not correct or disingenuous or something there. However, I do have to say the administrative office functions of this program appear to be consuming 2 full floors of this building with extremely generous office space. I don't see this as an accessory function because it's almost it's twice, let's say it's equal to the main function. And I don't see why this has to be located in the same building as the educational facility, which was mentioned, I think, by Commissioner Otley Brown last time. The building is very large for the area and is adjacent to two-story, one- and two-family homes. The ask is more than double the FAR and proposes to eliminate setbacks and increase the height by 15 feet over allowable. The board has often pushed back on administrative offices that drive waivers. There has to be some give here. As we said at the last hearing, they need to put functions in the cellar. There isn't a cellar now, but there's no reason why there couldn't be one. As far as we can tell, it's very far away from floodplain, unless there is, don't know what. And I think the height has to come down by 1 story, but I'm not persuaded that there is reason to permit at the 3rd floor waivers of yards and setbacks. That should be a compliant floor. Furthermore, what to remember is there's an illegally constructed 2-story building on this site, and we're being asked to essentially legalize that illegally constructed building that received no deference waivers or anything. And that building has a 1st floor to roof height of 34 feet in 2 stories. So that's effectively a 3-story building, give or take. You could add a little bit more height, and then you have a little more head clearance on the 1st floor because that's customary. So the program shown on the 1st floor has no need for high ceilings. We're not talking about big gathering spaces. It's lots of small classrooms. And so I don't think it's right for us to be looking at accepting as a given the floor-to-floor heights of this existing building, and therefore impose on the neighborhood this enormous structure just because they've got this, what might be a 20-foot high 1st floor. It might even be higher, but I don't have the information. I would like also to understand better the amount of floor area in the currently leased spaces. According to the Programmatic Needs Report, there are currently 147 participants in all programs, but somehow the projection is to serve 724 persons, of which 400 are the Community Habilitation Program participants. So those are the people who, and that seems to be inconsistent with the description of that program that indicates that community habilitation people are served at home or in their communities and come to the site only for special events or potentially for medical care. So that would only be that they come to the medical offices, so that's just that. And maybe the occupational therapy offices, which is part of the medical suite anyway. And not to any of the other part of the building except whatever the special events might be.
Or maybe just for the initial introduction to the program and what kind of packages they might avail themselves of, and the case manager. Those seem to be the only connectors with the community.
Right. But if they're served off-site, then it sounds like they have off-site case managers, so like the parent or caregiver might call and say, I would like this person to participate in the community hab. Please come to my house and let's get started, or something like that. Because the idea of making someone who has a disabled child drag themselves all the way across town just for a meeting seems to defeat kind of the purpose of the in-home services that are provided, but maybe that's the way it's done. And on the chart, it indicates there's an average of 20 participants in the community hab served daily. So that cuts against the 400 program participants that are filling up this building. It's 20 people a day, not filling up a building. And then shouldn't some of the staff be overlapping among the programs? It can't be that every single program needs a different staff member. Is that really true? It seems like inefficient. If you're bringing everybody together in one spot, then you could share secretaries, you could share, I don't know, different kinds of administrative functions. And then just some other things. There remain 21 open ECB violations with $8,000 in fines owed. Those need to be paid for us to complete this application. And you can't wait out the 7 years until those fall off the charts, which we know a lot of people do. The fire department asked for clarification about whether there is proposed access to the fourth floor roof terrace. Apparently, they've taken it away, but that wasn't clear. We have many open DEP issues. We expect a mid-May review on the last submission. And then we had many questions about parking and drop-offs, and I don't think these were answered in the latest EAS submission. With 97% of the participants arriving by minibus or van, the quantity of drop-off pickup is significant. The EAS states that the vans and buses are parked off-site. They need to provide more info on that. What is the arrangement? Where are they parked? How many vehicles are there that are parked? The EAS states that there are upwards of 112 pickup drop-offs per day. How do they, and what about appointment participants, whatever that is? That may be the community have people, I don't know what. I didn't know whether that was factored in because I don't see how it fits within their description in the EAS. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that was my concern at the last hearing, and I thought the EAS was not properly documented. In terms of the EAS talks about how there won't be any issues with on-street parking or backup, but they were basing that on the employee and not on the patients visiting for the day hab or for the community hab. And as you pointed out, over 90% of the patients on a daily basis are coming by van. So there's going to be pickup drop-off. We need to know how many are going to be dropped off. There's like the school exercise that we go through. What is the operational plan, where they're going to be dropped off, how many are going to be arriving? Because this is a residential street, and the drop-off area that has been indicated in the plan, there's a fire hydrant there. And so I'm not sure you can use that. And that's the street frontage that is abutting the residential uses. It's not on Avenue M and McDonald, not on McDonald, because that's where the elevated train track is, so you can't park there, but even on Avenue M, that's not where it's shown for the drop-off pickup. So I do have a lot of concerns, and with regards to the programmatic thing, I have similar concerns about why the office management, and I think Commissioner Brown had also mentioned it, cannot be separated. Why does that need to be on the same site? If there's going to be consolidation of some of the medical needs type of uses on this site, why can't those spaces be used for office spaces? And the synergy between those operation and the on-site medical operation has not at all been established in this document. So I question, as Commissioner Brown did, is why those need to be on the same site.
Right.
And same thing with the case manager also.
Case manager
Case
what?
managers also, they're not, these are the case managers who are actually operating on the community, as part of the community hub, and why do they need to?
Well, that I
such a
get,
huge
they have to
area.
come back to an office to handle their paperwork and so on. They definitely
But the
need
area is
someplace
too
to
big.
be.
I know, but the
Yeah.
area is too big, and they're not all coming at the same time. It's
Right.
all staggered, so I don't think any of that documentation has been clearly established to justify for the amount of space that has been allocated for this.
Right, I think what they do is they address those issues by saying, this is an accessory use, and they go through the accessory test and say, this meets the three prongs of the accessory test, therefore it could be co-located here. And they don't go any further as to talk about how it serves the program, that they be co-located. And that's what's missing from the analysis, because I'm still not convinced that you need a fundraising, an accounting, and an executive offices, an IT department. Well, maybe you might need an IT department, a summer camp program, and the list goes on and on. So they need to tie that in. As to their Cornell deference argument, I actually was convinced by the paperwork, but between the two sets of cases that you quoted, between the one about the therapeutic kind of education and having a different level of education for those who are more challenged, that I thought was very good, but then in order to satisfy the first question that you asked in terms of meeting the test that the Riding Academy was faced with, they could perhaps show that there's an educational standard and a progressive educational curriculum that applies to them as well at this site. And then that would satisfy that first set of questions.
Right. Others? Anybody else on this? No?
I was convinced in their argument for Cornell deference. I do agree with Commissioner Otley Brown that they should detail that more clearly.
Okay, so, and I just want to go back to some of the comments about parking. The study concludes there's a parking demand for 67 spaces where none will be provided, and only 35 on-street parking spaces were identified during peak hours. Parking is a more acute issue in this case, where participants in the program will be brought to the center by family members who will stay, actually must stay, right? So the idea of a drop-off is probably less the case here. And it is much less likely that families will come with public transit, given what we've learned in those 3 typical patient stories that they provided us, right?
Would probably want to look for a parking in the immediate vicinity.
Yes, and the parking garages are a mile away. So you are not parking a mile away unless you're providing at the center little minibuses that bring people from the parking garage to your center, which is maybe a way of doing it. And maybe that's the thing. Identify a site that can receive the needed amounts of parking and provide, since you've got minivans that are working, provide some sort of shuttle service that people who come here would be regulars, you would think, right? So that everybody would be aware that the shuttle service will take you from the parking garage. Maybe that's a way to solve it, but they haven't solved it. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Item number 23, 2018-117BZ, 2060 63rd Street, Brooklyn.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, but I'm a little far from it.
You're too far away. Okay.
Closer. Do you want me to recall it?
No, I think it was okay because you're standing next to the mic. Next to the camera, so. The design has been revised to reduce the waivers to the side yard only, since the lot itself is 148 to 154 feet deep and generates plenty of floor area and ample rear yard and lot coverage opportunity. The proposal now is an 87-foot long house that shares a party wall with a 36-foot long house, but at least the front walls are retained to match the rows of houses on the block, and the 3rd floor sets back an additional 17 feet from the front. I don't love it, but a rendering was done, but its position doesn't really tell you whether you can see the 3rd floor from other places on the street. It just takes one oblique angle that shows you see the little peak of the addition, but I think actually this addition will be visible from everywhere, no matter where you stand, because all of the houses have 2 stories with flat roof. So you can't avoid seeing it from lots of different vantage points. But it isn't great, but ... On the retention of existing walls and joists, the legends are not consistent with the plans and sections, and the plans, not just the demo plans, must indicate where the joists will remain but be lifted. I also don't find the standard note on the drawing, which we requested, about the retention of existing exterior walls and joists. That needs to be added to the drawings. And to clarify, it says removal of existing exterior walls and floor joists in excess of those shown on the plans will void the special permit. Any other comments?
Zoning calendar, new cases. Item number 1, 2017-265BZ, 318-320 54th Street, AKA 5401 3rd Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. We have what I want to say is some impressive record keeping for proof of continuous use
Yeah.
since 1991. This is a person who you really want to work with on forensics. I didn't understand the sign discussion in the statement of facts. It sounds like there is too much signage to comply with the C1 regulations, and in comparing the proposed elevation to the approved, I don't see 3 signs extending above the roof line in the approved. I don't think you're allowed to have roof signs in C1, but I need
So
to check.
there was a BSA
No,
approval.
No. There's 3 different signs. I'm not talking about the billboard, I'm talking about 3 signs. So here's the roof, and the signs do this. So there's a rule about roof signs, which I didn't have time to check, so.
No, I agree with you. I think that's been my concern, trying to understand. So I understand there's a BSA variance that was granted for the bulletin board, which also has the clock thing. That's not what my concern was with the amount of signage that has been indicated that was granted through BSA. It's a 35 square foot. Those are 3 signs, 1 right on the entrance in the middle and 2 vertical kind of signs. At least as part of the submission that has been given to us, none of those drawings indicate those signage. So I'm not sure where in the historical documents it states that. So we definitely need that to be ironed out. If anywhere there's I didn't see any of the approved plans indicating that. There's no, I don't think even in the resolution there is any reference to that. All it says it has to be per C1, but, so I'm a little confused.
Well, but it doesn't really matter as long as it's per C1. It doesn't matter what was approved the last time, as long as it complies with C1.
And that goes to what the current situation is. There is more signage. Even
Right.
if you were to count those granted for BSA, if you count those 3 and what is there is more signage than
Yes.
C1. So there has to be a signage analysis conducted
Yes.
as what's there today, and going forward, kind of figure out what the BSA grants and should be clearly stated.
Right, but I don't think those things that extend above the roof line are permitted under C1. They need to check, but pretty sure no. Carlo is nodding his head no.
Yeah, I
Shaking his head no, whichever one that is. And then also, this is a general question. So the billboard sign was granted by BSA for use by a business as an accessory business sign. And at the time, it was used for Utz potato chips. And then apparently, DOB concluded that Utz was no longer a tenant there, occupying the space, so that it was not a legitimate business sign. So my question really to present generally is there an issue with the idea that BSA granted this as an accessory business sign, and then the accessory business sign use was effectively abandoned because it didn't become an advertising sign either because DOB disallowed it. So DOB said, you're actually using it for advertising, take it down, so they covered it. And now they want to come and use it, what sounds like as a legitimate accessory business sign in connection with this current user that makes the Venetian blinds. Yeah, Carl?
Just if I remember correctly, I'm sorry, but wasn't that under a separate variance, under a
Yes,
separate calendar
variant,
number?
yes. Separate calendar number?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's not.
So I'm just bringing that up because procedurally, I don't know if that's a question before us at this time under this application.
Oh, I see.
It's not.
Okay, because it's mixed together in the application materials. So asking to continue the use because right now, DOB has required that the sign not contain text, right? So the applicant may need to amend the application, I don't know, because they're asking in these materials whether they can use it for this, whatever the name of the
Yeah, that would have to
company
be
is.
under
They
the
would have to
calendar number
agree,
that
yeah.
granted the variance for the accessory use of the.
Yeah, that was my understanding, if I remember correctly, that
Yes.
I don't know that that's a question before this application at this time.
Okay, so,
That was
but
my
that's important for the applicant to
Yeah.
understand. If that is to be, the question is to be answered, then the application has to be amended to travel.
It's not
that
this
other-
application, it's a different
No,
application.
no, but the reason I keep mentioning it is in the statement of facts, the applicant is asking, can
do.
we use this for our current use? And so if that's a question before us, then the application has
It's
to
not
be.
No, so if they want it to be before us, if
If
they,
they
with the
want
chair
us,
saying.
if they want us to
Yeah.
answer the question, then they need to amend the application, right? Otherwise, we can't answer it, and we can't potentially cure the DOB direction, which basically says it's an illegal sign.
So they have to bring under the other calendar number a reinstatement of that variance
Yes.
as well, and provide continuous use
Or-
of that variance with no
Right,
discontinuance of 2 years plus.
And they would have a difficult time to showing that based on what they put in the statement.
They might, so we don't need to discuss it, because now we've just decided that we can't discuss that subject here, but the applicant now is here and has a direction that if that sign is to be considered, the application needs
accessory
to
to-
be, what?
An accessory.
That's what they're asking. The current owner, who's been there since at least 91, if not way before that, in fact, way before that,
June, yeah.
since, it seems like since the 50s.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
sorry, since the 80s, since the
Yeah.
80s for a Venetian blind assembly. Since the 80s, that, the current owner, applicant, or let's say the current business has been in the site. And we actually have continuity of use proof since 91, right?
I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to confuse anything, but if, for all intents and purposes, if it's an accessory sign, and that's what the variance was.
No, but this is in our district.
Right, but the permission to utilize that billboard.
Why are we discussing it?
Yeah,
We shouldn't.
We shouldn't be discussing it.
So this is something to, I guess, talk about with staff,
yes.
Yeah.
right? Because, right. And the reason for the confusion is because it's in their materials.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
I'll just also add that there's no mezzanine drawing provided.
Right, I had, that was part of my note, is that the zoning chart and the statement of fact states 10,000 square feet of floor area, and I don't think it includes the mezzanine floor area. And the mezzanine floor area has increased from the time when it was initially approved, so we do need to have those included, corrected, fine.
Great.
And rest of my comments were all related to signage.
Which you've already
Signage,
stated, or
which
you have?
already-
You already stated,
It's
or?
the confusion with the 35 square foot being counted as
okay.
granted through a BSA variance, which I did not see any of the documentation. And we should be analyzing the signage analysis fresh, everything, and see how it complies with C1.
So but I don't find anywhere that the BSA granted more signage than was allowed as of under the C
I agree with
district.
you.
So it doesn't really matter what was granted before, it wasn't a specific allowance for excess of C1, it seems.
I was just giving the benefit of the doubt if there are any other documents that were not included that stated it.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments on it?
Item number 2, 2018-34BZ, 102-02 Metropolitan Avenue, Queens.
Okay, this is a legalization, and we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. The applicant said the community board never responded, but we should reach out to the community board, which we should always be doing when we don't have a community board response, as opposed to relying on the applicant to potentially not give it to us. We have one letter in support, we have DOI, we don't have fire department on this, or I didn't find it.
No, we don't.
So fire department needs to respond, and it's legalization, so, and they say so in the materials. The drawings are really quite basic. I didn't understand the site plan. It doesn't show from what street you access the elevator. There's no connection from the first floor entrance to the PCE elevator. The site plan doesn't show at all that there's a little parking area at Metropolitan Avenue side of the building or of the actual side lot of the building that may be a point, a route of egress. The streets need to be shown on the first floor plan. I never understand drawings that don't show streets. And they need to show the property lines clearly and indicate what the conditions are between the building wall and the property lines. Like, you can't find where the front door is. It's quite a strange,
The drawings on this application are kind of,
terrible, for lack of a better word,
I think
terrible.
also what confuses this is that there are three buildings on two separate tax lot, and
Jella.
the PCE is partially on portion of the first building, and then it's on the entirety of the rest of the building, so I think the narrative is also a little confusing.
Yeah, narrative's confusing. It wouldn't be needed if the drawings weren't so terrible. So, yeah, okay.
I
Yeah,
had,
and-
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Again, I think my comment was that the plans indicate Lot 1, but the PC is on Lot 1 and 5. So those are the confusion. And the signage, it says 50 square feet. Now, is that the combined sign frontage? Because it is a corner lot, that's not very clear. And because the plan indicates only signage on 71st Street, whereas I think it has signage on both Metropolitan and 71st, so those clarifications needed.
I didn't see any hours for Saturday. I was wondering if it was the same as Sunday.
Oh, yeah, that's right, there's.
And they should break their signage out by frontage, since it's two frontages.
Right.
yeah, for the DOI, I didn't see it, where it is in the folder.
Folder called DOI.
I found DOI, it
I
might have
found
been
it too.
something that was sent late, because I always check an email.
It's the last folder.
Okay,
Yeah, it might have been just sent at the end of last week and you missed it, so.
okay, and all the dimensions on the drawings need, actually, I would say all the drawings need to be re-looked at, because they are signed and sealed, and
They need to be looked at by
I'm a
somebody who knows how
professional
to draw.
engineer, and I wouldn't, if I see drawings like this, I wouldn't sign and seal them. Yes,
Yeah,
seal
that's
them.
you.
The dimensions are mixed up, the
There's no
drawings
orientation.
are not clear. If you look at page 14 of 14, I don't know what is that. The page before, the dimensions on the elevations are not at all clear. So I urge the board not to like move a project like this with kind of drawings like these. They need, whoever submits to the board need to understand that he submits to a set of professionals, and we're not taking something like that.
I just want to reiterate one comment that, Chair, you have raised. The disconnect between the PCE use on the first floor and the second floor. Given that this elevator is only going to serve the PCE on the second floor, I'm not sure why there isn't a direct connection from the PCE on the first floor to the elevator. Why does one have to step out,
Right.
go around the corner and take the elevator, which is exclusively for? Unless the ground floor PC is only like all the sales of all the clothes and things like that, and the office spaces and upstairs is where the main PC is, so it will be helpful to get that clarification. If that's the case, then maybe it makes sense to have that separated.
No,
Sometimes-
I think it's just how it was marketed, right? They marketed it with the idea that the second floor would be a separate, in terms of the building design, would be a separate commercial floor, and it didn't occur to them at the time that they would combine a piece of retail with the second floor, which is a pretty standard assumption. And so they didn't bother to do the most obvious thing, which is create a door between it's just too easy, right? Put a door between the PCE on the first floor and the lobby to the elevator, and then you come into reception, you show your membership card, you go up the elevator, right? So, yeah. Because it does treat a disabled person as a second-class citizen. They go in and then they have to go out and go around. And the big joke is if you're in a wheelchair, you better be prepared for a big hike because you have to walk further than everybody.
And one more thing, on the cellar plan, it's not clear how wide is the hallway that takes people, that provide access actually to the cellar portion of the PCE. I can't see how wide is that. So if they can provide dimensions for this hallway, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Board, and we did get a fire department letter. It's not in the file, but I was just forwarded it. So
Okay. What did they
there's
say?
quite a bit of comments on the plans, regarding the plans.
But is it a letter of no objection or objection? Objection. So that we have letter of objection.
Yeah, letter of objection.
So that should be circulated to the applicant as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Item number 3, 2018-174BZ, 1440 3rd Avenue, Manhattan.
This is also a legalization. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. We have 2 letters in support. We have DOI. We have a fire department letter of no objection, but I don't think they were aware this was a legalization. And just as a note, this is a tiny little building, and ADA requirements are met by offering similar changing facilities on the first floor. And this activity studio is on the first floor also.
I just have comment on the signage. The plan indicates 42 square feet and the signage chart indicates 64 square feet. Though both are less than the permitted, it needs to consolidate.
Okay.
Bless you.
Item number 4, 2018-182BZ, 220-05 Hillside Avenue, Queens.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. I don't think this one is open yet. Community Board recommends, I don't know, actually, I didn't see a recommendation.
approved.
Approved.
Approved 30, unanimous
Okay.
Yeah,
approval.
I didn't
36.
make my note. I didn't
And there are
finish this
2
one.
letters of support.
Yeah. We need DOI. For some reason, I didn't find that in the folder. We have fire department letter of no objection. And I just want to say that I appreciate the applicant explaining clearly the history of the zoning lots development with respect to district boundary lines and the subsequent map changes that place the entire building in the C district. Based on the site plan, it looks like all of the parking spaces are effectively within the C boundary as well. And when I say effectively, it's because a few of them fall a little bit outside, but it's within that 25-foot. So that was very helpful because it's a very strange site. And at one point was subject to a special permit to allow the relocation of the district boundary line, which no longer is needed.
I had a question. In the plan, there is about 2,500 square foot of space marked as physical therapy. I just want to know if that is part of PCE or is that a separate operation, and will massage be provided, and therefore, I guess it's not in operation yet, so we cannot.
No, right.
But then the statement of fact needs to be clear whether massage will be provided.
Item number 5, 2019-8BZ, 3000 Jerome Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. I think the building is still under construction. These kinds of things need to be verified by the applicant. Community Board waived its hearing. We have 1 letter in support, we have DOI, and we have Fire Department letter of no objection. Anything else? Anybody? Okay. That's it.
This concludes the review session for the April 23rd, 2019 public hearing.